All right, in this video, we're going to look at the circumference of a circle. So first we want to understand what a circle is. A circle is a set of all points in a plane that are the same distance from a point called the center. So a circle is not made up of sides. It's made up of an infinite amount of points that are all from the same distance from the center. That distance from the center is called the radius. So the radius is the distance from the center to any point on the circle. So I've from the center to any point on the circle, that distance is referred to as the radius. If I go from this center to here, that would be the same distance, and that is also the radius. The diameter is the distance across the circle through the center. That distance is referred to as the diameter. The circumference is the distance around the circle. So the circumference, we don't say perimeter because there aren't sides to add up. So to find the circumference, we do need a formula. We're going to discuss that formula that we use to find the circumference of a circle in a second. We want to talk about the relationship of the radius and the diameter first. So if we look ahead at example 1, finding the radius and the diameter. The radius, I'm actually going to drop back here. The radius is half of the diameter. So the radius is the diameter divided by 2. The diameter is 2 times the radius. So that's the relationship between the diameter and the radius. So if we look back at example 1, find the diameter. Something we want to note about all diagrams of circles. If we have a line that's drawn in the diagram, so if that line is drawn from the center to a point on the circle, it's referring to the radius, and the measurement given is also referring to the radius. So no matter where the 7 is, maybe the 7 centimeters is over here, or maybe it's down here, it's referring to that distance. So the radius is 7 centimeters. The diameter is twice that, as if we extended through the center to the other point on the circle. 14 centimeters. So the diameter of this circle is 14, the radius is 7. If I look at example B, now I have a red line that goes through the entire circle. That's referring to the diameter. So the diameter is 26 inches. The radius is half of that, which would be 13 inches. So we want to understand that relationship between diameter and radius before we move forward. Now let's talk about the circumference. The circumference is the distance around the circle. We have 2 formulas for it, and they stem off the relationship between the radius and the diameter. The first one is the circumference equals pi times the diameter. Pi is the value of 3.14. So we're going to say circumference equals pi times diameter. Or we can use circumference equals 2 pi r. Where does this equation come from, or this formula come from? Well, 2 times r is equal to d. So we're essentially saying 2 radius is equal to 1 diameter. So what we have is we have a formula that involves diameter, or we have a formula that works with the radius, but we need 2 of them, which makes this diameter. So that's kind of the interplay between those 2 formulas. I'm going to focus on this formula for the remainder of this video. So circumference equals pi times diameter. If I'm going to focus on this formula, I have to make sure that the value I'm substituting into it for d is in fact the diameter. Meaning, if I'm using a diagram that has the radius, or I'm given the radius in the problem, I have to double it and use that value for the diameter. So let's look at example A. Finding circumference of a circle. I'm going to start with my formula. Circumference equals pi times diameter. Now looking at my diagram, 7 is the radius, which means the diameter is 14. So instead of 7 going in here, I have to make sure I put a 14 in here. Pi I'm going to replace with 3.14, and that's going to give me my circumference. So 3.14 times 14 leaves me with 43.96. I'm going to use a label of centimeters on here. Now, I use 3.14 for pi. If you were to use a pi key, remember, like a pi key on a calculator, remember that your value, your final result is going to be off just a little bit, usually that decimal piece. And that is because we have truncated our pi to 3.14. If you use the pi key, you're using many more digits of pi, which is going to change that result when you multiply. If we look at B, in this diagram, I have the diameter. The diameter is 26. So when I use my circumference formula of circumference equals pi times diameter, I can go ahead and plug that 26 right in, 26 for diameter. And this is going to give me a result of 81.64 inches. So these two are the circumferences for each circle. So that's using that circumference formula. Why don't you go ahead and try practice C and practice D on your own and check for the answers in a couple seconds. Hopefully you paused the video and attempted those 2 practice problems. If you didn't, you're going to want to do that next time we have a practice problem. In part C, we had C equals pi times diameter. We were given the diameter, so I used 12 in my formula. In D, I was given the radius, so I had to double it here to use my circumference formula that involved diameter. All right, now we're going to look at semicircles. So in example 2, we're going to say find the perimeter of a semicircle. So a semicircle is half of a circle. So looking at this semicircle, there's 2 parts we have to find. The first part we want to find is the curve or the arc of the circle. That is half of the circumference. Half of the circumference. So half of circumference. Or we know that's the circumference divided by 2. So that's going to give us the arch, or the arc, I should say, of the circle. Then we need this last part, because if I were to walk around this semicircle, I think of walking around as the perimeter. I walk along the arc, and then I have to walk back along the diameter to get to my starting point. So I also need the diameter. The final result for the perimeter is going to be the arc, which is half of the circumference, plus the diameter. So let's go ahead and do this. I know my diameter is 6. So for circumference, I'm going to do 3.14 pi times diameter 6. And I'm going to cut that in half. That's going to give me that arc. Then I'm going to add the diameter, which in this case is 6. If we had a semicircle that just gave us the radius, we would have to double it to find the diameter and make sure that that's the value here. This first part gives me 9.42. I add 6, giving me a result of 15.42 meters. And that's our perimeter of our semicircle. All right, so I have 2 practice problems here. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try those 2 and check back in a few seconds for the answers. Okay, so here we can see our results for practice A and practice B. The one thing I want to note in practice B was that problem I was talking about where we had the radius of 11. We had to double that to find our diameter and use that in our formula, as well as use it at the end to add that distance. All right, let's go ahead and look at the last piece, example 3, finding the radius and diameter of a circle given the circumference. So I know the circumference. I want to find the radius and diameter of the circle that would give me that circumference. The circumference of a circle is 28.26 centimeters. what is the radius and the diameter? Because we're dealing with circumference and we see circumference, I'm going to jump right to that formula. Circumference equals pi times diameter. Now I'm going to substitute in what I know. I know the circumference is 28.26. I know pi is 3.14. I do not know the diameter. So I've created an equation that has one variable, which will allow me to solve. I'm going to draw my line, and I need to undo multiplying by 3.14. So I'm going to divide by 3.14. That's going to give me a value for the diameter of 9. So the diameter is 9 centimeters. The radius is half of that, 4.5 centimeters. In B, the circumference of a circle is 10 pi inches squared. Should not say inches squared, it should just be inches, because we're not dealing with area, we're dealing with a distance around, so just inches. What is the radius and the diameter? This is a unique way to write anything involving pi. It's kind of the exact form it's called, because it hasn't truncated pi, it hasn't rounded anything. It's like the most pure way to write an answer. It's also called being written in terms of pi, meaning it involves the pi symbol. What we can do is we can multiply 10 times pi. So 10 times pi is actually 31.4. So this is equal to 31.4 inches. I can go ahead and use that value and do 31.4 equals pi times diameter. Now pi is 3.1, or excuse me, I have 31.4 here. I'm going to cross this out. I have 31.4 here. Pi is 3.14, and I have diameter there. So if I solve this, I slide my paper up here. If I divide by 3.14 and divide by 3.14, I'm going to end up with a diameter of 10, leaving me with a radius of 5. We can actually do this again and get the same answer using that 10 pi idea. So let's try that. If we start with circumference equals pi times diameter, I'm going to use 10 pi in place of 31.4 because that's what it told me circumference was. Now, I still want to get diameter by itself. So we're going to divide this side by pi, but we're going to just write the pi symbol instead of 3.14. I'll show you why in a second. Well, on the right side, these pi symbols will cancel out, leaving us with diameter. And on the left side, the pi symbols will cancel each other out, leaving us with 10. Diameter is 10, radius is 5. If you think about it, if circumference is being described in terms of pi as 10 times pi, our circumference formula is diameter times pi. So if we get rid of the pi here, we're actually looking at that diameter number, which this showed us as well. So either way would work. That is all we have for circumference. So looking at that circumference formula, C equals pi times diameter. Hope this helps.